The afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long golden streaks across the neighborhood lawns. Birds chirped lazily from the treetops. My daughter sat quietly in her wheelchair at the edge of our yard, sketching with her favorite violet pencil. She was humming softly, her way of talking to the world. The flower bush near the property line was blooming wildly, a few petals having drifted onto the sidewalk like nature's confetti. It was peaceful. It was normal. Until it wasn't. "Hey, get away from those flowers." The voice sliced through the calm like a rusty blade. Karen. She stood across the hedgerow like a storm in a sundress, eyes blazing, finger pointed with the rage of a woman who had spent far too long thinking the world was a garden, and everyone else was a weed. My daughter looked up, confused, her hand still gently resting near a fallen petal. She didn't even touch the bush. I said, "Back off. I warned you." My daughter tried to wheel backward, but the grass caught her tires. Her eyes widened. My blood froze. And then bang. A single gunshot ripped through the still air. Birds scattered. My wife screamed. My feet moved before my brain did. I burst out of the garage, heart pounding, throat dry. Karen stood there, arms stiff, gun aimed skyward, but her body was shaking. The smell of gunpowder clung to the breeze like poison. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, running to shield my daughter. She was frozen. Not crying, not blinking. Just frozen. She was trespassing. She was damaging my property. Karen yelled back, the barrel still trembling in her hand. "I warned all of you about this." She's a child. A disabled child. I looked at my daughter, her sketch pad now lying in the dirt, a violet flower drawn half-finished. Her fingers still held the pencil. And in that moment, I saw something break in her, something that should never be broken in a child. The neighbors were gathering now, phones out, mouths agape. Someone was calling the police. Someone was crying. And Karen just stood there like she was the victim. This isn't the beginning of the story. Not even close. But this was the moment everything changed. Freeze frame. You're probably wondering how we got here. Why a neighbor would pull a gun on a child over flowers. Why this neighborhood, this perfect HOA community, became the battleground for something so dark, so twisted. Well, buckle up, because this story isn't what you think. We moved into Briarwood Estates 2 years ago. It was the kind of neighborhood that sold you on quiet streets, trimmed hedges, and welcome baskets delivered with 4 smiles. The kind where everyone waves, but no one really talks. My wife called it storybook suburban, and at first we were just a family trying to find a fresh start after a storm. My daughter, Amelie, was born with a neurological condition that left her legs paralyzed from the waist down. Doctors said she'd never walk, but she never cared. She loved colors, shadows, anything she could sketch. By age 5, she was winning elementary art competitions. She always carried a tiny leather sketchbook in her lap, like it was an extension of her soul. And despite her challenges, she smiled more than most adults I know. But not everyone saw her light. Not Karen. From the moment we moved in, Karen made herself known, HOA president, flower obsessive, and self-appointed neighborhood enforcer. She had a white mailbox shaped like a tulip. She had rules about trash bins not being out past 6 p.m., about grass being exactly 3 inches tall, and of course about her flowers. Ah, yes, the flowers. She had dozens of them lining the front of her yard. Roses, hydrangeas, rare orchids flown in from God knows where. They weren't just plants to her. They were monuments to control. She once fined a neighbor $150 because their kid kicked a ball that landed in her peonies. No one dared speak back because Karen was the HOA. Our first run-in was barely even a confrontation. Amelie had rolled her wheelchair down the sidewalk and paused by Karen's front hedge to sketch a pink rose. She wasn't even on Karen's lawn. Not an inch. Just sitting there in her own world drawing. But Karen stormed out like we'd unleashed a wild dog. "Tell your daughter not to lurk outside my house. She's making the neighbors uncomfortable." My wife was stunned. She's sketching flowers. Karen didn't flinch. Then buy her a book. Not my property. We brushed it off. Thought maybe she had a bad day. But it never stopped. HOA notices started appearing in our mailbox. Sidewalk chalk not permitted. Your daughter's ramp is not HOA approved. Noise complaint filed. Humming heard after 8 p.m. Humming. It was relentless. And Amelie? She tried to understand. Daddy, she asked me one day, did I make the flowers sad? I didn't know how to answer. So I lied. I told her, no, baby, the flowers love you. Some people just don't know how to see that. We tried everything. We attended the HOA meetings. We offered to volunteer. We even baked cookies for the board. Karen never touched them, never looked us in the eye. It wasn't about us. It was about control. And my daughter, being who she was, curious, expressive, unapologetically joyful, was a threat to that. One afternoon, we found our fence cracked. One of the wooden panels had been kicked in. Karen said it must have been the wind. Another time, Amelie's sketchbook was found soaked in her front yard sprinkler runoff. We couldn't prove anything, but we knew. The final straw? A letter slid under our door in an unmarked envelope. Keep your child away from my flowers, or there will be consequences. We showed it to the HOA board. They said it must be a prank. We filed a report. Nothing came of it. The police took a statement and said, without direct evidence, there's not much we can do. But we knew. This wasn't just petty behavior anymore. It was hate, cold, calculated, and quietly growing like weeds under perfect soil. I installed security cameras, bought floodlights, changed the locks. Amelie stopped going outside as often. She used to wheel herself up and down the street every evening, waving at neighbors and sketching trees. Now, she mostly stayed inside, quiet, withdrawn. I once caught her staring out the window, sketchbook unopened. I asked why she wasn't drawing. She whispered, I don't want to make anyone mad anymore. That broke something in me. This neighborhood promised peace. What it delivered was paranoia, fear, and passive-aggressive threats dressed up in bylaws. But I knew something was building, a confrontation we couldn't avoid, and deep down, I feared it wouldn't end with words. Because Karen wasn't just a control freak with flowers. She was the kind of woman who believed rules gave her power and people like us didn't belong. What we didn't know was that she had recently purchased a firearm. What we didn't expect was that she'd use it. If you've never lived under a homeowners association, let me tell you, it's like signing a lease with a narcissist. And in Briarwood Estates, Karen was the queen narcissist. But unlike most dictators, she didn't need an army. She had paperwork, power trips, and a board of neighbors too timid to say no. At first, the harassment was predictable, passive-aggressive notes, anonymous complaints. But things shifted around the time school, let out for summer. That's when Karen stopped hiding behind policy and started weaponizing presence. She would just be there, standing on her porch with a mug in hand, watching. It started small. Amelie would wheel down the sidewalk for her usual morning sketch, and Karen would appear by her mailbox, staring without blinking. Sometimes she'd trim her hedge for 20 minutes straight, scissors snipping at invisible leaves as her eyes drilled into my daughter. Other times, she'd pace along the edge of her lawn and mutter, "Low," angry things we couldn't always hear. One day, Amelie came inside early. I asked why. She said, Karen whispered something when I rolled past. What did she say? She said, I warned you once. Flowers don't grow for trespassers. I marched out to confront her, adrenaline high, fists clenched. But by the time I reached the hedge, she was watering her roses like a saint. Sprinkler in one hand, fake smile on her lips. Can I help you? You threatened my daughter. Excuse me? You whispered at her. You scared her. I was talking to my cat, she replied smoothly, gesturing to a ragged tabby perched on the fence. You really should get your facts straight before making accusations. That's slander. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because that's what Karen wanted, a show she could twist into a complaint. Instead, I installed a second security camera. This time, one that covered the sidewalk. That night, someone egged our front door. Coincidence? Sure. If you believe in fairy tales, A week later, Amelie's tires were slashed. Not the whole tire, just shallow cuts, enough to deflate slowly and make her feel stranded. She came home crying. That night, my wife asked if we should move. She never said that before. But I shook my head. No, we fight. We document. We win. So that's what we did. We started recording everything. Every HOA, notice, every whisper, every stare. We backed up footage from the cameras onto cloud storage. I bought Amelie a GoPro she could attach to her wheelchair. She didn't understand at first. Then she did. And that made me hate Karen even more. But the real escalation came during the July HOA meeting. We arrived early, hoping to sit near the front. The room smelled like bad coffee and freshly printed rulebooks. Karen sat at the head table in a floral blouse that screamed irony. She smiled at everyone except us. Halfway through the meeting, she pulled out a laminated policy revision titled Property Preservation, Child Access Limitations and Respect Zones. She claimed it was meant to protect delicate landscaping. But the wording was surgical, phrases like unsanctioned presence, special needs mobility impact, and quiet zone buffer area. I raised my hand. So, let me get this straight. You're suggesting children, especially disabled children, shouldn't be near flowers? Karen tilted her head, that fake civility oozing through her teeth. I'm suggesting that every resident deserves the right to protect their property from unintentional damage, regardless of how emotionally sensitive the topic may be. Gasps, but no one stood up for us. Not one neighbor. After the meeting, as we were leaving, I heard her murmur to a board member, "You give them one ramp, and suddenly they think the whole street belongs to them." That night, I filed a formal harassment complaint, this time with legal intent. The next morning, our mailbox was open and emptied, not stolen, just scattered on the ground like confetti. Still not enough evidence for action, according to the HOA. Still not technically illegal, according to the cops. I began walking Amelie to her sketch spot every morning, staying close. She stopped singing while drawing. Her color choices got darker. She started sketching Karen's house, but in the background, there were shadows, long and twisting. When I asked what they were, she said, things that don't like to be looked at. Then, one evening, Karen crossed the line in a way we couldn't ignore. Amelie was sketching tulips from across the sidewalk. I was watching from the porch. Karen came out holding a sign, Private Zone. Do not linger. She shoved it into the grass between her yard and the sidewalk. Your daughter has 5 minutes. I stood up. That's not your property. I said 5 minutes. She's not even touching your lawn. Karen's eyes narrowed. Do you want me to call the cops? I know people downtown. I pulled out my phone and began recording. Karen turned and walked inside, but before closing the door, she said just loud enough for the mic to catch, she's going to learn the hard way. That's when I realized this wasn't just about control or flowers. Karen saw my daughter as a target, a statement, something to intimidate and punish. And I saw what she was becoming, a woman so addicted to power she would do anything to feel in control again. I just didn't know she had already purchased a gun. And the next time Amelie rolled too close to the flowers, Karen wouldn't use words. She'd use something louder. It happened on a Tuesday. Strange how evil chooses such ordinary days. That morning, Amelie woke up early. She said she had a new sketch idea, a tulip garden growing out of a cracked sidewalk. Beauty growing from broken things, she told me with a sleepy grin. I packed her sketchbook, checked her wheelchair tires twice, and kissed her forehead. She rolled outside with the kind of peace only children can still find. I watched her from the kitchen window. She parked near the sidewalk, just opposite Karen's yard, on our side, clearly not trespassing. She took out her purple pencil and started to draw. That's when Karen came out. Not in her gardening gloves, not in her HOA hat, but in boots, heavy black boots, and a leather jacket, even though it was 87 degrees outside. She wasn't carrying scissors. She was holding her phone, filming my daughter. I stepped outside immediately. What are you doing, Karen? Gathering evidence. For what? for the board, and for the police. This ends now. You're harassing a child, a disabled child. Stay away from her. Karen didn't even blink. She has 5 minutes to move. I called Amelie to come back, but she was already backing her chair away when her wheel caught on the uneven pavement and jolted her sketchbook out of her lap. A gust of wind blew a page into Karen's yard. That's all it took. Karen snapped. She threw something at my property, she shouted, pointing at the drawing, a tulip sketched in purple ink. You saw it. That's vandalism. I came running. It's a drawing, Karen. She marched to her front door and disappeared inside. I thought that was it. Another tantrum, another complaint. But she came back, holding a gun, a small silver pistol. No warnings this time. No talking. She raised it. Karen, bang. A crack echoed down the street like a thunderclap. Birds flew. Dogs barked. I froze. For 1 second, I didn't know who had been hit. Then I saw Amelie, still in her chair, hands over her ears, eyes shut tight. The bullet had struck the sidewalk, near her, a warning shot, as Karen would later call it. I screamed. Neighbors screamed. My wife ran from inside, barefoot, breathless. Where is she? Where's Amelie? Karen stood there, gun still pointed down. Her hands were shaking. Her mouth opened, some bizarre combination of a smile and a snarl. She was warned, she said coldly. I pulled Amelie into my arms. She was sobbing now, the sketchbook crushed against her chest. I turned to Karen. You could have killed her. Karen shrugged, but I didn't. That night, we filed a full police report. Officers came and took her statement. She claimed self-defense. She said she feared for her life because of repeated threats from our daughter. From our daughter, who weighs 55 pounds and can't walk. We showed them the camera footage, the audio, the video of her raising the gun and firing it toward a child. One officer's face turned pale when he saw it. She's lucky that wasn't worse, he muttered. She is lucky? I repeated. Karen was taken in, but not in cuffs. Not with urgency. The HOA president, the same woman who once fined us for an unauthorized porch light, called the incident a misunderstanding. Karen's just passionate about her property, they said, but this wasn't about passion anymore. It was about hate and power and a system designed to protect people like her and silence people like us. The next morning, we received an email from the HOA. Due to recent events, we kindly request all parties refrain from instigating future conflicts near shared property borders. They didn't name Karen. They didn't mention the gun. They blamed both sides. I looked at Amelie. She hadn't spoken since the incident. She just sat there, sketching a black and white tulip with a pistol growing from its stem. She asked me quietly, "Will the flowers always hate me?" That's when I knew this wasn't over. And this time, I wouldn't just protect my daughter. I'd destroy the lies holding this neighborhood together. Karen pulled a trigger, but I was going to pull everything else down. In the weeks that followed, nothing made sense. Not the law, not the silence, not the absurd calmness with which everyone carried on. You'd think a woman firing a gun near a disabled child would create uproar. But this was Briarwood Estates. Here, silence was currency. And HOA loyalty was the unspoken religion. Karen? She was still in her house, still tending to her flowers, still walking her yard like a queen surveying her dominion. She'd been questioned by police and released within hours. Her weapon was registered. She claimed reasonable fear, self-defense, and apparently that was enough. The HOA never condemned her. Not once. In fact, we received a letter a week later. We understand emotions are high. Please refrain from further accusations against residents. We are reviewing all footage internally and will act accordingly. What action? Nothing ever came. Amelie? She stopped going outside completely. She began sketching darker things, dead trees, cracked pavement, broken glass. She drew flowers with thorns too long, petals that looked like blades. She didn't talk about the gun, but she jumped at loud sounds. She asked me to close all the blinds at night. Her childhood had been fractured. And the person who pulled the trigger was still a free woman, trimming her lilacs, smiling at her porch camera. I knew I had to act. So, I released the footage. All of it, the warning shot, the screaming, Karen standing with the gun, and saying coldly she was warned. I blurred Amelie's face, but left everything else raw. I posted it on every neighborhood page, Facebook groups, Reddit, Twitter. I even emailed the HOA mailing list myself with the subject line, "This is who you're protecting." The video went viral within 48 hours. People were outraged. Comments poured in, "She could have killed her. This is attempted murder. Period." And the HOA did nothing? Local news picked it up. Then national media. Karen's name trended. Her roses were now the most hated flowers in the country. But what really pushed it over the edge was Amelie. She posted her first ever video on my wife's account, just 60 seconds long. She sat in her chair, clutching a flower made of torn paper. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I'm 9. I like flowers. I like drawing them. I didn't know that could make someone so mad. I don't want anyone else to be scared of flowers like I am now." And then the tears came. Millions watched it. Millions shared it. People donated. Protesters showed up outside the HOA office. Local parents demanded Karen's arrest. Under pressure, the DA reopened the case. Citing new public evidence and social unrest, they reclassified the incident, reckless endangerment with a firearm in proximity, to a minor. Karen was arrested, finally, but even then, she acted like she was the victim. She exited her home wearing pearls and sunglasses, muttering to reporters, "I was protecting my property." But the world no longer cared about her hydrangeas. The court date was set. The HOA board released a cold, vague statement. "We do not condone violence. We are cooperating with authorities." They were silent about their failure, their complicity, but it didn't matter anymore, because now the world was watching. And for the first time in this entire story, the power had shifted. Amelie didn't just survive. She stood up. And that scared Karen more than anything else ever could, because guns can silence for a moment. But truth echoes forever. The courthouse smelled like old paper and cheap coffee, a place that promised justice but looked tired of delivering it. Still, it was the only battlefield left, and we were ready. Karen sat at the defense table, her hair tied tight, her face stretched in a smug calmness only guilty people learn to master. She didn't wear her garden hat this time, just a gray pantsuit and a pearl necklace, like she was the victim of some misunderstanding, not the woman who'd pulled a gun on a child. The courtroom was packed, press in the back, angry parents in the middle, neighbors who had once waved but never spoken, now suddenly interested, and at the front, my daughter, seated beside me in her chair, holding a folded-up tulip she made from pink origami. The prosecution came prepared. They opened with the footage. The room watched in absolute silence as the video played, Karen yelling, Amelie backing away. The moment the sketchbook hit the wind. And then bang. The gunshot rang out again, this time not in the open air, but in a room full of stunned adults. Some flinched. Others gasped. I saw one woman, a mother, cover her mouth and cry. The prosecutor paused the frame. On Karen holding the weapon, the barrel still pointed toward the cracked sidewalk. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she said, that child was not a threat. She wasn't armed. She wasn't trespassing. She was sketching a flower. And that woman, that adult, responded with a firearm. The defense leaned hard on fear. Karen's lawyer called her a concerned homeowner with a documented history of threats from her environment. They even tried to paint me and my wife as aggressively confrontational. They submitted HOA complaints as evidence, the very same ones Karen herself had authored. It was laughable if it weren't so disgusting. But the truth? The truth had already escaped their control. The video had gone too far. The public had seen too much. The court couldn't unsee it either. Then came the hardest moment, Amelie's testimony. She was nervous, shaking, but she wanted to speak. The judge allowed it. My hand stayed on her shoulder the whole time. She looked directly at Karen as she spoke. I like flowers because they don't yell. They just grow. I didn't want to hurt anything. I only wanted to draw. She held up her sketchbook, the one with the bullet-scarred cover. This is what I drew the day she shot the gun. The courtroom fell completely silent as she held up the page, a simple tulip blooming from a cracked sidewalk with tiny wheelchair tracks in the dirt beside it. No words, no drama, just raw innocence. Even the judge had to pause before continuing. Karen never looked at her. The jury didn't take long. Less than 3 hours. Verdict: guilty. Reckless endangerment of a minor, illegal discharge of a firearm in a residential area, emotional abuse under civil statute. Karen was fined, stripped of her firearm license, and sentenced to 6 months of house arrest with mandatory psychological counseling. It wasn't as much as we wanted, but it was something, a scar on her record, a permanent truth. But the bigger victory? The HOA collapsed. 3 board members resigned the same week. The president, Karen's close friend, issued a written apology. The bylaws were rewritten with new language protecting accessibility rights and banning targeted fines or behavior. New families, the kind who once kept quiet, came forward and told their stories. Karen's reign ended not with a bang, but with a collective voice that had finally had enough. Amelie went viral. Her tulip drawings sold online to raise money for anti-bullying programs. She was interviewed by morning shows, invited to speak at schools, but she didn't care about the fame. All she wanted was to not be afraid anymore. And one day, about 3 months after the trial, I looked out the window and saw her again. She was sitting at the same spot near the sidewalk, same purple pencil, same sketchbook, but this time she was smiling. Life didn't return to normal, but it returned to something better. Karen's house went up for sale within weeks of the verdict. The flowers she once worshipped wilted under her absence. Nobody watered them. Nobody mourned them. New buyers toured the place in silence, careful not to step too close to the sidewalk. Eventually, the sign changed to sold, and just like that, the ghost left the garden. The HOA, once a machine of silent fear, underwent a total transformation. A new board was elected, people who actually believed in community, not control. They reached out personally, apologized to us, to Amelie, and rewrote the bylaws with her in mind. Amelie's case inspired a wave of policy changes across the county. Neighborhoods started reassessing their HOA rules. New protections were introduced for children with disabilities. Her name was even mentioned in a local ordinance, something called the Amelie Clause, protecting children from being fined or harassed for non-destructive play or presence in public zones. But Amelie, she didn't care about any of that. She cared about her garden. That fall, she asked me to help her build something in the front yard. Not just plants, an art space. A wheelchair-accessible garden bed with sketch stands and a sign that read, "For all who see beauty where others see borders." Neighbors came. Kids came. Some just to draw. Some just to sit near her. Some just to say thank you. And one day, while she was sketching a sunflower, she turned to me and said, "I'm not scared of flowers anymore, Daddy." And I smiled, not because we won, but because she healed. The thing is, evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears pearls and grows orchids. It hides behind rules and regulations. But the truth, the real truth, is that courage doesn't always come in armor either. Sometimes it rolls in quietly, with pencils and paper, and a heart too big for any HOA to break. This story didn't start with a gunshot. It started with a flower, and it ends with 1, 2. If this story moved you even a little, don't let it stop at the screen. Share it. Talk about it. Ask yourself what kind of community you live in and what kind you're building for your children. Speech Balloon, drop a comment below. Flowers don't need permission to grow. Bell subscribe for more real stories that expose injustice and elevate courage. This is HOA Denied Access, where silence ends and the truth begins.